Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of TheoryForge Friday. This is episode 34, I believe. I hope I'm right because I did the overlay for it. We're here to talk about death. Death, the Reaper, and every mechanic that surrounds it. We've got, a usual cast of nefarious suspects in SOG, Phantom X, and Diggs. And then we've also got a guest on he's a developer from Ilphonic, Snipe Hunter. Also Adam Maxwell, if you are familiar with him. So he's got Twitter and stuff. You guys can check him out. But yeah, we're happy to have him. He'll provide some excellent insight on this topic. I think we all have a lot to say about this, and I think that you guys do too. So feel free to chime in with questions in the chat. Talk. We've got, I believe, Neurotoxin is in chat with us, and he's going to be hanging out there and keeping it rolling and passing stuff up to us. So feel free to chime in. But anyways, we'll start off first for the people that aren't familiar with Snipe Hunter. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your background in development and everything, kind of give some people some insight into your perspective and background.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm the lead system designer over at Ilphonic on Revival. I've been working in the games industry for a couple of decades at this point. I started, QA, like kind of the sort of classic story QA up into production and then into design. First game was Warcraft 2, which is kind of cool. For the last 10 years or so, I've been working mainly on online games in one form or another, and major console games. Revival is actually my fourth MMO, but it's the first one where I'm really calling the shots on the entire sandbox.
Very cool. Yeah, I believe a lot of us here are following Revival pretty closely. I know myself and Diggs definitely are, and we talk about it quite a bit. So it's doing some new things, and I think that's kind of a big part of our discussion tonight is talking about death mechanics, what's been done, what hasn't been done, and maybe some things that we'd like to see happen with the mechanic in the MMORPG, kind of, well, in the MMOs in general, but specifically MMORPGs. Death matters a lot more when there's context applied to it. So, but I guess we can go around the table and get everybody's initial take on death as you see it now. How you think it's been handled the last couple of years or something. Just kind of give whatever thoughts you have on death. So we'll start off with Phantom X, and I'll slide it around.
I've always seen death as more of a deterrent, sort of the challenge. You don't want to die because in the old days you would lose stuff, you'd lose experience. I mean, how many people played EverQuest and you finally get through one of the hell levels, you're at level 55, you die, and you're back at 54. All those shiny spells you just memorized you can't use anymore for a little while. But beyond that, that's a good question. It's sort of what is the actual use for it? Why does it exist other than just a risk added to the game? And even nowadays, it's not really a risk. It's more of an inconvenience of a time crunch. You might as well just revive right back where you were, rather than having to run back like WoW or something. There really is no risk to it. So that's sort of my take on current. And then I guess we'll get to the future hopeful in a little bit.
Definitely. I think I didn't have the thing up, so I didn't see what order we were going in, but I guess clockwise I'd be next. I think that death is really intriguing because it's been done in a lot of different ways over the past, for however long, and there's a lot of games out there that have tried different things with death that we've seen. But I think a lot of what we're seeing today in MMORPGs is death being this, it almost feels akin to platformers. When you're playing Mega Man or something, you're trying to get through the level, you fall and die, and it just resets you. You have some small obstacle. Maybe you're really far in the level, kind of like if you're really far into a raid, you've got to get rezzed and run all the way back. It's so akin to that, and I'm not sure if that is the best, answer or the best expression for death in an MMO, but that's kind of the way I see it right now. I think there are a lot of fun things that could be done. I personally am a fan of, flavors of permadeath, that could be in. It just depends on how they're handled, but I definitely think that there should be a lot of consequence applied to death, more than there is today. So those are kind of my thoughts slide it over to Sir Sog.
For me, I think that the death mechanic is fundamental to what you expect players to be doing. I don't think World of Warcraft has a bad death mechanic that everyone dies and then they just have to run back to the raid instance and zone back in or whatever. That understanding what people are doing and what the expectation is the biggest key to figuring out what kind of death mechanic works in that circumstance. In Super Mario Brothers, if you die, you go back to the beginning of the level. If you're out of lives, you're probably dumb and you should throw your game away. But if that really happened, I'm sorry. But yeah, it's the idea of what is the difficulty of the game. It's the difficulty that your hand-to-hand skills, you need to figure them out to get to the end of the level, and you need to practice and you need to learn, and that's what the game is about. That's what Mario is about. It's about practicing, understanding the physical mechanics and the physics in the game and learning the patterns and being able to get through a challenge. And failure is just you restart. But when we talk about an MMO, we get into this problem where we feel like we're real people in the world, but then when we die, it kind of feels like nothing happens, and then there's this disconnect. And I think the biggest hurdle is that we see a whole lot of static content where it's treated exactly in the same way as Super Mario, and you have this challenge in front of you, and you need to figure out and you need to do what you need to do to be able to accomplish that challenge right in front of you, because you know where you're going, you have to get through that to move on to the next one. And then when we get really harsh death mechanics, they're obnoxiously punishing, because really it is this linear path. It's not about living in the world. It's not about your character really dying. It's about, you just didn't accomplish the next step that we gave you to do, and now we're going to beat you over the head with a club. And I think that there's plenty of opportunity for changing and working in a gameplay system that allows for different styles of death mechanics, and we'll get much more into that later. Diggs.
Hold on. I think that one of the fascinating things about death mechanics to me is I often hear people on forums talk about how punishing the mechanics were for vanilla EverQuest, and you had to corpse run, and that's what forced people to group up, and it never forced me to do anything. It's always just been an inconvenience for me. But it's not there to... I'm never worried about death because there's no permadeath. I just want my character to continue its story. I got defeated in this battle, bandage myself up, and go back in and try again until you win the battle. But I want it to be that way because for me, RPGs are like interactive novels, and I want my characters to be like the protagonists in a novel that's going to last a trilogy or a series, like Xanth, that's had one book come out once a year for 30-something years. I want those characters to continue having stories, so I don't want permadeath. I want death to be, what it is in these games, which is failing your challenge and then jumping back in to go back in. But there could be better ways to make the death mechanic more interesting, and that's kind of what I'm looking forward to in some games that will be coming out soon.
As a fan of some novels and stuff and trilogies and the way characters persist, I totally want to jump on with some follow-up questions to that, Diggs, but I will save them for later because I'm sure we will come back to that. So Snipe, what are your thoughts?
Oh man, I actually hate death mechanics in MMOs. which is funny because I ended up engineering one that's kind of like harsh if you really think about it. But what I hate is that they're always like a negative feedback loop, right? Like if you think about it logically, when you get to a point where you die, it's either because you didn't have the right gear, you didn't have the right skills, you just weren't good enough. But then a lot of games like expect you to go right back to that spot. You're just gonna die again, and it gets even worse in some games where there's like a debuff or something that happens when you die. You know what I mean? And it's freaking ridiculous if you ask me. But in a way, that's actually how we ended up with the death system in Revival, because I'm not the only one in the field that way. We were kind of all ranting against that, and somehow ended up making a hardcore death mechanic as a result. But that's how it goes, I guess.
So with Revival being kind of slated as, an MMORPG to some extent, I know you guys call it a multiplayer evolving online world, which is awesome. I like that new term. That is not hardcore death mechanics are not the most popular thing. Can you talk to us about what some things you're planning for Revival's death mechanic, and kind of share with the audience, your different take on how it can be done that you think is successful?
Absolutely, man. The death mechanic actually wasn't even meant to be hardcore. That's kind of why I laugh at ourselves for what we did, because what we wanted was a way to break that loop I was talking about earlier, right? We didn't want to create a system where it was throw yourself against the wall, die, throw yourself against the wall, weaker, die again, throw yourself against the wall, even weaker, die again, right? I stopped playing EverQuest after an epic de-leveling bout, for example, right? Like, just have never gone back since. And so what we wanted to do was like make death sort of change the way you play, right? And so that's when we thought of the whole idea of the spirit world. So what happens when you die in Revival is you'll hover over your body as a ghost for a little while, and there are some things that you can do and some things that people can do around you to bring you back if you're fortunate. But otherwise, what'll happen is after a certain amount of time, you'll get pulled into another plane of reality, Anima's realm, the realm of death, right? And then from there, you'll have to find your way out back into the real world, at which point you'll be what we call re-embodied, respawn, basically. And so the whole idea there is that, like, when you die, we go, okay, well, hold on, play the other half of our MMO, right? Take a break from that. And that's kind of what there's like mysteries in the plane of death, and there are people that live there, and there's a whole other like aspect of the game to be played there. And we sort of wanted to give you, while you were fuming about the rage you just lost or whatever, we wanted to give you something else to do that was still fun and adventuresome. And there's a whole mechanic for the fact that you lost all your gear so that you can still adventure while you're a ghost. Like, there are things in place so that instead of being a penalty, death is just another adventure. And that was kind of the whole point. Though amusingly, when we turned around and looked back at what we had designed, we realized that we had also just designed a full loot open world PvP system wherein you literally leave your body behind for someone to raise as a freaking zombie if they want to.
Wow, that I was not expecting that last bit. That's pretty interesting. So I don't know. It's pretty crazy. I think that we follow Revival pretty closely because there are things like this that you guys have planned that really kind of start stretching the box of what people expect from a particular mechanic. With death specifically, what you guys are doing, it's taking that, taking the typical, it's a quick flash of your eyes. You're blinking in your MMO experience in death, to it being integral to the other systems of the game, the other mechanics, the actual story and context. And even for games that aren't trying to be MMORPGs, I feel like games could do a better job of integrating their death systems, impactfully into their other gameplay and their other mechanics. But for some reason, they just haven't done that too much. So one of the questions I kind of wanted to pose to everybody is, why do you think that death, the traditional form of death that most MMOs are using, why do you think that currently exists today? Like, how did it get there?
Well, they had to do something. They weren't going to do permadeath because people are too invested in their characters, and it's too easy to die in an MMO. And the reason that it's so easy to die is because you overthink how good you are in combat. you have all this stuff, and it all only takes an ad that you didn't see to pop up behind you, or one little thing that you miscalculated for you to die. And if that ended up meaning permadeath, people would stop playing. So they have to come up with things that will kind of punish you for not succeeding your challenge, but isn't as punishing as permadeath. But one of the interesting things that Revival, the concepts that Revival has that are changing the way I think about death mechanics, is that it's impacting the way I think about PvP as well. So in most MMOs, PvP is a problem because it's a time sink that takes away from my time doing something that I'm an explorer primarily. So it takes away my time exploring, or my time, whatever I decided for that particular game session. I might have decided I'm going to do this, or I need to accomplish this within an hour. And if somebody comes by and kills me, then that takes away my time. I've got to go back and regain that experience. I've got to go back and get back to the area that I died in. But with Revival, because I'm an explorer, for me, if I'm going into the spirit realm, I want to spend time exploring the spirit realm. So dying in Revival isn't as much of a deterrent as it is, in my mind, for traditional games. That's kind of what I'm looking forward to with Revival.
Yeah, on that same note, I kind of think, when you brought up that Revival is kind of changing how you think about PvP, it kind of makes me think that, another thing that Revival is doing that kind of leads to this line of thinking, I think, for me, is that, because combat itself is not becoming necessarily the focal point of this MMO, it's not all about combat. In other MMOs, pretty much anything you do in them revolves around combat in some way. If you're a crafter, you've got to go to dangerous areas to get the high-level stuff. You've got to level up. You've got to participate in the combat system. And that isn't necessarily the case in Revival. You might need to participate in combat at some point, but it's not like you're going to have to do the same things the majority of everybody else is. And I think that's probably also led to the current state of death mechanics we see today, because since everybody has to go through combat, since it's such a main part of the game, it can't have you can't have permadeath, like you said. It can't be this really consequential thing, because everybody's going to be doing it so often. The amount that most people are going to be dying, it will be quite high. So
I think it's twofold. The first is, because this topic is so hard, there already was something before anybody made a graphic video game MMO, or a visual online role-playing experience, and there already were systems in pencil and paper, and there already were some systems in MUDs for how you manage re-rolling or start overs and things like that. And the other thing is that a lot of games that we're talking about, because of the static content, it needs to be tuned in a way that it creates that kind of challenge, where what Diggs is talking about is you're walking this fine line where one ad could completely, that you didn't expect, and all of a sudden you're dead, and it's because the only way that you can enjoy this game is that you put yourself in a situation where you're fighting it that close to the limits of your power. And that was a tough thing about EverQuest. I remember trying to solo level around like level 14 or 15, and there wasn't any good experience stuff that I could fight, and the stuff that I actually got experience from was too strong. Like the first hell level I reached, and it's that idea of trying to balance what is a static progression content so that people are always challenged and always feeling like they're accomplishing things, but if you don't accomplish it, something has to happen.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there a little bit to expound on that, because you get to a spot where the stuff that's like blue to you will give you like 1/100th of a point of experience, and you're like, well, I'm gonna have to spend 3 hours here just to get one bubble of experience, or I can go fight the yellow thing, and maybe I'm just close enough that I'll be able to defeat the yellow thing, and I just get to the last bub, and then I die from the yellow thing, or maybe I'm almost ready to kill the thing, and an ad pops in. So yeah, you get to that point where the stuff that you can really fight comfortably will take you forever to level, or you try and get to the next thing up that's challenging, and you're going to die several times before you defeat it.
See, when I think of it, when I'm leveling in an MMORPG, I don't feel successful because I didn't die. Now raiding, that's I guess a different story. If you're in a raid and you didn't die, that's a success. But for me, again, back to EverQuest days, I think it was a mechanic to force people to help you if you did die, but also just as a risk, the risk reward challenge, and it really was a risk. I mean, you lose your stuff, you lose your experience, you have to have, how many times were there hours of corpse runs trying to get bodies back, and just complete pain in the ass stuff. And you sort of fast forward to now, and that just doesn't really exist. And the way I see it now is it's more of an expected thing. People expect there to be death, but they don't really want the penalty, so it's just sort of there. I don't see it as serving any real function. It's not positive, it's not really negative, it's just sort of there.
Yeah, I think the one thing that even in those situations it gives you is for a fact you lost when you died. Right, and mind you, I don't necessarily like knowing that I lost, but at the same time, if I know I can lose, that gives me something to strive for. And as a designer, that's the one piece of a death penalty that always makes me go, well, crap, I can't just completely throw this out because I need you to know you're going to lose. I actually think that's why City of Heroes did the whole wake up in the hospital thing, because they were like, come on, nobody really dies, right? But you still need to lose.
Especially in the superhero genre.
Totally.
Yeah, the death is never permanent, ever, for anyone.
Yeah, when I say that, I mean, it does provide, obviously, the reward. And raids, I mean, that's the big focal point. I mean, you want the loot, but I'm thinking, if you die, I mean, you lost. But when I'm leveling, it's not necessarily something I think about in today's MMOs.
No, you're total. I totally agree, man. Like, I don't think that not dying is a win. I go for the ding, right? That's the win.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always fascinated me that developers, what developers do is design the reward structure in their games. Like, every developer designs how they reward their players and what about the game is going to be rewarding, because that's what they build. You really build around that, and it's just fascinated me why you see different games out there that for whatever reason you have to go through so much hell and torture to get the rewarding experience, and in a lot of times it greatly outweighs the rewarding feeling or the rewarding mechanic that's being targeted. And has been brought up several times with EverQuest. A lot of that, especially as it moved on and the game kind of evolved over time, death became kind of painful, because all the different reward, like the experience that people that played a vanilla EverQuest, that whole experience was awesome and a reward in itself. So living through the death part of it was a lot easier. As people played for months and years, it got more and more painful because the experience itself got watered down a little bit. And I think some of the development team over there didn't really, I don't know if it was because of the original design or how they were restricted or what they could do, but they never really started changing the reward structure or increasing the way that people could get a rewarding experience to kind of combat that really powerful death mechanic that game had originally.
For sure.
And ultimately they ended up, toning down the, how bad the death penalty was, to the point, where you're not even having to do corpse runs. You've got the plane of knowledge. You can just jump to wherever, you don't, they just took that away because it was no longer, outweighing the rewards were no longer outweighing it.
Just to throw this there too, back when I was playing EverQuest, many years ago, and I had the time to, I actually didn't necessarily hate or dislike the death penalty. I thought it had a sort of at that time it had a use, but definitely in today's time frame with the family and work, there's no way in hell I would enjoy anything like that currently.
And EverQuest specifically, also, one thing that their death mechanic did was gave people roles in the player economy. Like rogues had a purpose, other than it gave rogues a purpose to corpse pull for people. It heightened wizards' ability and druids' ability to port you across the world quickly if you bound somewhere really far away. It created some interdependency, but I think that in retrospect, there are a lot better ways that can be done. That player interdependency can be done with a death mechanic than the way it was done in that game.
Well, one thing that I think one of the things that I hated too about EverQuest is the whole corpse looting part, and I could have just gotten that really cool item that I spent an hour battling for, and then get killed for whatever reason, and somebody can just run by and loot my corpse. But one of my favorite moments in EverQuest was when my girlfriend was playing for the first time. I had taken her to one spot and told her to fight in this location with her back to the wall. I'm going to go finish this one quest and come back. And I hear her screaming for me, come quick, I died. So I come running so I can loot her corpse for her. And she says, never mind. Some nice person came by and I gave him permission to loot my corpse. I'm like, who? She's like, oh, I don't know. He just said he would help me out, so I gave him permission. And who? You don't just give your permission out to strangers. Oh, but nobody would be so mean that they would really steal my stuff. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? So that kind of concerns me with Revival. I don't know if we'll get to that point. What's going to happen with trying to protect our loot while we're dead?
You won't care
but
you're
it
a
was fun.
zombie or a lich or something. Or,
Yeah, actually,
For a while.
the way people are afraid of losing items scares me as a designer, because one of the things that we want to, I hate to use the word play, but I suppose that's the best way to put it. One of the things that we want to play with is your expectations on things like everything is permanent, everything I build on will last forever, right? Because in a changing world, it literally can't. That's counter to the purpose of the world that we're building. And so I need to figure out a way to get people to go a little Buddhist and sort of let it go, and I don't really know if we're capable of it. I mean, we've spent decades now hoarding cool loot, and it's going to be really hard.
You're going to try to make Americans not be materialistic.
Yeah,
no.
it's just a small goal. It'll be fine.
I think
I love game. I love non-permanence. I love it. Every time I've experienced it, I've preferred it to the. You can't have without some sort of item destruction. You have to build in a reset, and even if that means an expansion, right? So the expansion pack makes everything that everyone has that's permanent obsolete. It's the equivalent of just saying that nobody has anything, right?
Totally.
So if you want to have a dynamic world that changes and you don't need to hard reset the world, there needs to be something in there to keep it flowing. Every time I've seen a item lifespan, I don't necessarily like random breakage because it can lead to people failing things because of something out of their control in a not fun way. There's out of your control in a good way, and then there's out of your control in a not fun way, like my weapon broke while I was fighting the boss mob that I just wanted to get to for the last 3 hours, and that's why I died.
I think one core thing about this too, just philosophically, in the world, it's people have a more one thing that appeals to Americans is freedom, and in a lot of games, getting the bigger, better, stronger items increases your freedom. You're able to do more. You're able to participate in more things, do bigger raids, it opens up options for you the better gear you get, and gear is aesthetic too. The more you have, the more options you have, and it's freedom. I think designing an impermanent system where the less you have is what actually starts giving you more freedom in the game, is a good way of encouraging people to not cling to their items. If the more items you have, it requires a lot of maintenance, a lot of upkeep, or there are different penalties maybe to having a ton of stuff. People are going to start living a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter, and actually,
Naked
can be free.
mining. No
they
naked
can boot us.
mining. Stop naked mining.
But you know what I mean. There's ways that you can design mechanics to encourage people to live with less, do more with less, or be able to I don't know. It's not easy, that's for sure.
But it's not about amount, is it? Because so again, for me, especially fantasy RPGs, remind me of Tolkien. They're going to remind me of Camelot. And in those, the heroes have their signature weapons. We've got King Arthur has Excalibur, and he's going to have that for the majority of his adventures. The Hobbit has his magic knife, and those are signature items that they're going to keep throughout their adventure, and maybe even pass on to heirs. In the case of the Hobbit. So that's what I'm looking for. That's the reason why I want to hold on to my stuff in an RPG, because I want to have my signature clothing so that people can recognize me, and my signature spells so that people have an idea of who I am, and that's my role. In Revival, it might be a little bit different. It depends on what kind of items we're using and how we're using those items. So if I need a telescope in order to be an astrologer, I don't necessarily need, I would think, to have this uber telescope. If I just need a telescope, and that telescope might break, and I'm just going to replace the telescope because it's an average telescope, well, that's fine. I don't know that I need a signature telescope in that sense. So it kind of depends on what kind of items we're going to be using, and whether or not these signature weapons would even really be a thing in Revival. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, actually,
go for it.
thanks, man. One of the reasons that we want, a sort of sense of impermanence in the world is because when you come across, you get the One Ring, or you find Excalibur, we don't want players to think this is how my game is going to be forever from now on. We want them to look down at these awesome items and go, oh man, the things I'm going to do with this, right? Mm-hmm. And so we want people to use them while they got them, right? We want them to feel like there's maybe not necessarily a ticking clock per se, but that there's an hourglass, and how fast the sand goes through the hourglass is really up to how they play with the items that they have. But ultimately, someday the sand will run out and that item will be gone. With legendary items in particular, we have this whole idea where they have like minds of their own to go with it, right? And so the One Ring might betray you, and it might just drop off your finger in the middle of a fight while you didn't notice, right? And we can't, my fear is that we won't be able to sell this as a good thing, even though it opens up so many awesome gameplay potentials. You know what I mean? Like, people are so afraid of losing their stuff that I'm worried that they won't see the awesome party for the lack of the chocolate cake they were expecting.
So to me, again, I think in those terms, what would work for me is I might want a certain type of ring that is fairly average. Maybe it's even a cookie cutter thing. Maybe, whatever, all mages have this kind of generic ring. And then it's the legendary item that might be really cool that I might only get to have for a while. But I can always get back to that kind of average ring for general gameplay, and that's good enough. Because I don't necessarily always have to, as a role player, I don't have to be uber. I want to be unique, and I want to be good enough. I don't necessarily have to be, at the top of the heap the whole time.
I think Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I wasn't gonna say anything useful. So
I was gonna say, I think adding in mechanics where random regular quality items, can become legendary in a non-expected way, like a non-system, like behind the scenes, there's a system to it, but for the average player, they're not going to know, some type of randomness to, oh, I have an average ring, but then all of a sudden I go somewhere, I do something, and it becomes legendary. I think that would encourage people maybe not to cling on to, oh, I got a rare thing here, but it doesn't really matter. If you just pick the one you like, maybe it could one day be legendary. I think stuff like that helps. But I mean, ultimately, it is fighting this mindset of, people are used to the way gear works in traditional MMOs and how it's helped aid them up through the typical linear process that most games have. But, eliminating that already is a great start, because I think it helps eliminate some of the gear-based mindset too, like already with EverQuest Next, what they're doing, their kind of rough system of combat and landmark. People aren't, people may be min-maxing it to some extent, but really people are kind of just taking it and picking what they like and playing with it what they like, because there's no longer a sense of system where you need to constantly increase and upgrade your fighting style or your gear or anything to continue playing combat and being effective.
But the other fun thing about it being Lovecraftian horror is, in Lovecraft, the more you research something, the more you really don't want to hold on to that thing.
yeah, it's totally true.
you start wanting to get rid of it. So, you might be unlocking some stuff that seems good to you at the start, and then you realize, I'd rather somebody else have this thing. And if you play around with that, that could be fun too.
Yeah, in fact, I assure you we are. I mean, some items are going to have a terrible cost, but sometimes what you get is worth the price. Like, for example, when Al-Hazred wrote Al-Zif and it became the Necronomicon, there are tons of copies of that terrible, terrible book out there in the mythos, and the reason is because the spells in it are hella useful, even if you're a good guy, But the cost of holding it is literally madness. And yet they get passed down, generation to generation like they're heirlooms, right? We totally want that experience in our game.
Definitely. Yeah, I had another question here that was kind of a follow-up, and I was like so busy listening to you guys, I totally forgot what it is on this topic. It had something to do with itemization and death, but I think we can push forward to another big topic that I thought was definitely worth discussing, which, when it comes to death, if you're going to change the way death works in MMOs and do something different, there are different ways of accomplishing that, and especially I'm going to kind of revolve around permadeath, and you guys can take it however you want, but permadeath is definitely probably the polar opposite to the type of death that we know now, which is resettable, temporary, not impactful. Permadeath is the hard other consequence, the other end of the spectrum. So for permadeath, what types of things would you have to see, or would you want to see for a permadeath system for you to like it? Basically, for it to be viable in your opinion. So we'll kind of go back around. I'll start over with Gosog.
There has to be something that you keep forever in an MMO. That doesn't necessarily have to be your body. That's my thing. If you're building a world that's designed to be interacted with, that players are a participant in, that the player character could play the role of some sort of possessing spirit or something in a temporary body, and have a separate type of leveling system or skill improvement system for that. The idea that I've talked about mostly to myself in the mirror when I do that.
I do that.
Yeah. Is if player housing is kind of a requirement in a game now. So imagine that you have your own estate, you have your own heirs, you have people that work there, and we've talked a little bit about passive leveling here and there. Imagine if you can put these people to tasks. They're basically NPCs, but you can put them to tasks, and as they're growing up and as they're living, they're passively leveling while you, the controlling spirit of this household, is controlling a player. And then you come across something where your player dies. But then the experiences and the accomplishment of the player only become available and valuable to you at the time of death. So when that individual character that you are playing as dies, so this character became the mayor of a town. So that affects the whole family. The spirit has learned something, and that's carried on. And then you can go back into another body that maybe has leveled up some different physical skills, like it is more strength, or maybe has more of a magic affinity. That then you're playing in a different style, but you're still carrying on that legacy. And I would like to see that, but what it revolves around is any kind of system where any kind of game that would support this system has to be participant instead of consumer based, and I think that's the real key.
I don't know. I think that the model that you're describing isn't too distant from what League of Legends does as a MOBA. What you are is the summoner. You have this persistent growth between your masteries. You're unlocking runes. You're doing all this stuff, and that augments and supports any champion you pick. And the death of the champion doesn't matter. Even at the end of the match, it resets. There's this temporariness to your actual character life, and your actual persistence is in you, the summoner, and what you're doing behind the scenes. And I think that's obviously successful. I don't see why it couldn't be successful in an MMO. Given the right tweaks and things that it needs for people to feel like attached to that. Feel attached to the behind the scenes thing rather than attached specifically to the temporary character. And we're so used to just attaching to a specific avatar. It's definitely something that's against the normal train of thought, but opens up tons of interesting possibilities, which I think Diggs and Snipe that paid attention as well to the aging and dying forum in Revival's forums. That thread had a lot of this type of concepts in there in some way. So maybe one of you guys could talk about that a little bit. What you think about aging as it would pertain to death.
Yeah, I agree with Salag. I feel like a player having a legacy is an important part of the MMO landscape. Period. Right. I mean, honestly, it's what achievements are a pale imitation of, right? Like, you play a game like WoW and you earn some cool achievements that nobody else has, and you feel like you've done something special, you've done something, and passing on a legacy to heirs is a really attractive idea to me, and it's part of what led to the idea of that aging and dying thread that we were talking about in Revival. So the way I'm hoping it'll work, to be fair, we actually haven't decided for sure if we're going to do it, but the way it's going to work is every character, when they enter the game, basically has two what's the word I'm looking for? I guess health values, right? One of them is called spirit, and spirit represents the strength of their soul, right? And the other one is called lifespan, and it represents the average amount of time in the world that a person in their condition will live, right? Throughout the game, you can either earn or take what's called temporal damage, and that'll slowly reduce lifespan, right? On the other hand, you can also take spirit damage, which will slowly reduce your spirit value. When your lifespan ends, you're not able to respawn anymore, right? So you're now stuck in Anima's realm, in the realm of the dead. But in the realm of the dead, the value of your spirit makes all the difference to your relative power to other people there, right? So if you were a particularly powerful spirit, the fact that you couldn't re-embody anymore doesn't necessarily limit your gameplay. You might be able to play on if you wanted to. On the other hand, if your spirit eventually gets depleted far enough, you won't have the strength to resist Anima's call when she decides it's time to take your soul for good, at which point that character is done, right? and that's permadeath. Now, our expectation is that this will happen years down the line of real time. You know, you'll be playing 5, 6, 7 years before you even have to worry about it. But throughout the whole thing, your character will be aging and building its own legacy in the form of reputation and the goods that they produced and the things they own, the real estate that they own. And when they die and they're done for good, they can give it up and they can roll an heir. And they can leave to their heir all of their property, their journal, which contains a ton of information, even though their heir may not be able to digest it immediately. And then they can tag a couple of abilities and pass on those abilities as, you know, sort of genetic knowledge. You know, like maybe you taught your heir at the summer barbecue all about Cthulhu, something like that, right? And so over the, you know, if you were a long-term player, or if you were a really risk-taking player who ended up taking a bunch of temporal and spirit damage over the course of their characters' lives, you might have 5 or 6 generations of characters playing. But generally speaking, really, you're playing your family line generation on generation, and it sort of ties into the Lovecraft trope where all of, you know, not all of, but most of his stories start with some deranged uncle leaving somebody on a stage, or writing them a terrible letter that, you know, arrives in the middle of a stormy night, or right. And so it sort of plays into that exact same mechanic, and we kind of like enshrine it in the game if we do this. But the other thing we want you to be able to do is, like, at the end of your adventure, if you're hanging up your sword on the mantle, you don't necessarily have to die and become a ghost. You could retire and leave everything to an heir that way. And if you do, your character will stay around in your house as an NPC that you can then, you know, train with, or have him man your store, or act as a guard. Basically, you can do anything a hireling does, but you don't have to hire him. But he also has all of his unique skills and stats, which might make him particularly suited to, say, you know, being a blacksmith for you, or being a mercenary for hire for you, whatever your old character could do. And in theory, over the course of several years, you could build yourself sort of a, you know, the family that lives in the creepy house on the hill that, you know, has the, you know, that has the whole clannish, they all stick together thing. But really, it's just you and your NPCs, and you're playing your character, and that's kind of the core of it. But the reason we wanted to do it was to create the idea that someday this character is going to be done, so that you have this feeling like, I have stuff I want this character to do, and I have a limited time to do it in, and so I don't necessarily want to fuck around. Pardon my language. You want to, you want to consider your actions. Basically, the hope is that it'll help drive people in their goals. Because one of the problems with the sandbox game is when they jump into a game, they stare at, people look around and go, now what, right? And hopefully, at the end game, you don't have that problem. But if you do, hopefully a little time pressure will help you make a choice. And that's kind of why we originally started thinking about it at all.
I think, too, just to chime in real quick, I brought up the MOBA example with SOGs, but what you were just talking about reminds me a lot, actually, of The Sims, like this family life simulator. You can keep going on as long as you want, having kids, playing the next kid, and it's in a sandbox. The world's evolving around you to some extent, and there are a lot of people that love that type of gameplay, and I don't see, why there can't be a horrific, fantasy version of The Sims in, Revival in some sense, where you're, maybe you're attached to the one character, you play that person, keep them alive as long as you can for 5 years, but, maybe you play quickly through, a lot of high risk, high reward, and jump through generations really quickly, and I think there's advantages, to doing all that. The tricky part is getting it to, fit with all the other systems that an MMO embodies, that you don't really have to worry about in, a simulation game, especially a single player. But
this kind of idea with permadeath, to me, actually, I like. I'm one of these people that the idea of permadeath kind of, I hate it. It would scare me. But when you tie it into it, this is sort of a different meaning and a different take that actually makes it sound intolerable, and almost to a degree where you'd like to see what happens. Your question initially, Velix, about what do we not want with permadeath, or what I would want to make sure of if I'm playing a game where permadeath is a possibility, is that it's not something that somebody else can exploit to kill me. So some way to, so it's not like a one-time you die, you're done. Some way to, like what's being discussed now, though, it's more over time, so that if you have an accident or something, you're not completely shut out of that character from the get-go. Somebody comes up and ganks you and you're done. when that sort of change is made, permadeath actually becomes more of an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think in our pre
Yeah, I can't stand games that don't let you recover from a freak failure. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, that was something that we were kind of talking about in our pre-show chat. I was bringing up the idea of, what happens if you get disconnected, or, there's some other weird, uncontrollable thing that happens, and now you're looking at permadeath in the eye when you would not have normally died in that instance. So
There has to be something that you only get when you die. And that's where, when I talk about my idea of a legacy system, that the things that your spirit or whatever your possessing entity is earning only can be cashed in on death is one way. Another thing, Project Gorgon has the interesting death experience. So after you die to a certain number of things, that you gain experience in a skill called death. And there is a little bit of a, once you get high enough death experience, you have to have died. I may have died a few times in that game. You do go into a spirit realm, and then there are like quest mobs and like other things. It opens up this whole new thing of stuff that you can do. So you disconnect and you die, and then you log back in, and then you're there, but you've accomplished some things in the waking world, and then you can talk to this quest mob in the death realm, and you can turn them in, and there's a little bit of a not a desired all the time, although if you wanted to just game it and die as much as you could, and if that's fun, if that's fun for you, go do it. It's just like jumping 100 times to get your jump experience up. But
Totally.
Fine, but if you just die, you're like, okay, well, hold on, I'll be back in a minute. Maybe we can go back to what we're doing, but I've got some turn-ins to do, and my direction for play might even be steered differently because I've been exposed to something that wasn't primarily desirable, but it led me on to something that was desirable.
Right.
I think
it's
it's interesting.
Similar mechanic I think, in Revival.
I think it's interesting too, when you start considering permadeath as an option, especially in a role-playing game, where you've got context and you've got people that are actually acting in character. When your ally or somebody dies, maybe, you've got some lineage of always grouping with them, and that, there's a mechanic there where when that person dies, it actually impacts your character, and you start creating some social, mechanics and interplay between people just by the death mechanic alone, because now it has more weight. It should matter to, people that know you well, or, maybe the people that don't know you. It doesn't matter if, somebody you don't know dies, but if somebody you played with hours with and it tracks that somehow, that would be interesting to see, giving maybe a debuff to allies or something because you die, they're depressed. I don't know. There's different things you can do.
Yeah, like grief.
I'm not sure. I haven't played these games to know if they have something like that. I would imagine they might have some sort of tiny grief system, but since you talked about it, Snipe, it just opens my mind to a whole bunch of new possibilities when you start considering what simulation games do with certain things and death. So,
for sure, I feel like to me the mechanic will be like personally rewarding when I log into the game and I see a wake or a funeral or I see somebody build a tomb. You know what I mean? Like, because in theory, you'll have that kind of legacy, and you'll want to remember that character, and hopefully that'll happen,
One of the things we had talked about too is if you have like even like a government system or some sort of like political system, and you were this well-known character in this game for 5 years, and then somebody finally kills you and you're dead, and what if that like spontaneously triggers some sort of quest or something that happens in that town where all of a sudden the person or people who are responsible ultimately for your death are like, it becomes the goal of the people in there to kill them or do something to them.
Yeah, to bring justice, absolutely.
Yeah, that leads us into a whole other topic I know we can't even get into tonight with Revival's live storytelling. For the people that, I think we do have at least one person in chat, probably more, that aren't familiar with Revival, so it does have a live storytelling mechanic that go read their site at. We'll put a link in the chat, but it's very intriguing. So, but I do want to keep us on topic here. We've got a couple more minutes. We have so many, literally, like, thank you guys. We have so many questions in Q&A. If you submitted some, I'm not even sure we'll get to them, but I hope we do, because there's a lot of good questions in there and plenty of them. So I actually might even kick us off a couple minutes early here into it, just because there are so many, and I want to make sure we get a bunch of those through. So I'll go ahead and ask the first one with... we'll go ahead and ask Envoys here, which is, in a game with level normalized mobs and level restricted content, is there any value at all to leaving your body or gear where you die? Were you ostensibly at your limit?
No.
Yeah, I think that was one that you talked about a little bit, where we were talking about getting in that cycle, that negative cycle.
Exactly. It's a negative feedback loop in a lot of games. And to be fair, that loop is really meant for people to stop and think about what they were doing. And so you're supposed to wait out your debuff before you go back and play or whatever, right? But screw that. Nobody does that in real life. Instead, it's just a fail mechanic, over and over again. Screw that.
You should just get a title that says failure. I think we can move on from that question.
Yep.
I think that was a troll. I think almost trolling us here.
Yeah, the next one is by Lethality, that says, should combat or encounter design influence the death system design, i.e., WoW-style raids are designed with death in mind, so should the death designer consider the encounter design?
Interesting. I definitely think so. So Rift is a really good example of that. We went through, 4 different death mechanics on that game. From resurrect in place to go back to a spawn point to wait out a debuff to... Actually, so we did 3. My mistake. But when we did all of them, what we discovered is each different type of mechanic had a totally different encounter arrangement that made it work, right? And so I think you absolutely have to couple those two together. The way you build encounters and the way players die are absolutely related.
Definitely. All right, our next one we have by Sailkite that says, what games, MMO or otherwise, have death mechanics that you've enjoyed, thought were appropriate, or at least didn't drive you up the wall short of anything nice?
I don't think there's ever been one that I've enjoyed. To be honest, I mean, for me, the most casual, the easiest was always WoWs. I mean, you just run back. There's really nothing. That's the easiest one. The most risk that actually made me feel like I accomplished something again goes back to EverQuest. Now, like I said before, if I had that sort of penalty now, I'd probably, as I think someone in chat put, rage quit. But I don't think I've had one I've actually enjoyed. I don't know about you guys.
WoW was fine. EQ just pissed me off. EQ and EQ2 just pissed me off.
I actually, when I first played Vanilla WoW back in like 2005-ish, somewhere around there, I actually liked the death mechanic because I hadn't, other than EverQuest, I hadn't really played, Ultima Online, I hadn't played too many other MMOs, and getting this chance to be a spirit. I guess Ultima Online also had this to some extent. It was just a little different, but getting to be this
to troll when you
getting to be this ghost and running around was kind of cool. And in World of Warcraft, it was watered down a lot, but you could still go explore places. You could see different things. It was kind of interesting, just to add some contextual flavor to dying instead of just EverQuest was always weird to me. I appreciated the death mechanic back then, but it was always weird that you would die and you would go be looking for your body and you'd have a body and it just didn't, it didn't sink to me, especially when they were trying to encourage that role-playing, this RPG environment. So, I don't know.
The thing I hated most about EQ was when people wouldn't go back and get their corpse, and weeks would go by, and you just see bodies all over the place. And I'd be like, I just want to clean up the corpses. Can't I, as a druid, go through and just, make the land pristine.
Only you would want to clean the bodies.
The platforms outside of Kelethin as a
It's
newbie.
breaking my
I'm sure everybody
immersion.
has done
All
100
these
corpses.
bodies.
I was always
Just
checking in to see
disgusting.
when I could loot them.
The only death mechanic that I felt like meant anything that I've really played was in Sunless Sea. We talked about it a little bit in chat. When you die, you pick one thing to pass on, and sometimes you don't even have a good thing to pass on, and
Yep.
it sucks. But but that's part of learning the game and part of the play. But everything else, it's just felt like it's not really death. It's just you didn't win that time, and you go back and do it again. And there might be some dumb thing you have to do in the meantime, like run to go get your corpse or wait for a debuff to go off. All of that, it's artificial time sink thrown in there when it's really just about, you didn't win that time. What if you were playing Mario and you had to wait 15 minutes for your debuff before you could go and play the level again? To me, there's zero difference. Because I'm not playing a game where death matters. There is no death. You're not really dying.
Yeah.
For me,
As somebody,
the reality is most MMOs. This sounds silly, but I don't expect to die unless I'm raiding. Maybe I don't play an MMO with that feeling that risk. I don't know if that makes sense.
I agree with that. In a lot of MMOs today, unless you get intentionally careless, it is pretty easy to not die most of the time. But as somebody who played a lot of H1Z1, I actually thought death works out well in that. That it kind of enhances the experience of living in the moment and kind of enjoying the experience you have. You've acquired some things, and you get to see what you can do with those things before you eventually die, because it is pretty common. You just get into a situation you weren't expecting, or you get ganked by a bunch of people and you die, and you kind of reset. And it kind of changes your focus from hoarding things, because death comes so easy in that game, and it's so permanent. You lose all your stuff. You could run back over there and potentially get it, but normally you can't. It comes so often, you kind of don't try to hoard stuff at that point. You still try to get the experience, and it kind of leads you into this gameplay where you're like, especially if you're playing with friends, it's all about, what you've done together, what you're doing, what you ended up doing, how you died, and it creates this more of a memorable experience than, I don't have any really great memorable experience, too many of WoW, and I played, a couple of years of that. I already feel like I have just as many in H1Z when I played a couple weeks, because it kind of creates that environment. So, but we'll move on to the next question here. I think everyone's gotten a chance to chime in there. Legendary Neuro talked about, he's got several here. One of them here is, will there be death shapeshifters who can change their presence and appearance upon death and re-embodiment? And I'm thinking that's specific to Revival, maybe? You can chime in on the chat and say.
Sounds like it, though. So I guess, Revival specifically, probably not. There are skills that you can use to change your appearance, and there are spells that you can use to seem to change your appearance. But there probably won't be a death-related one. You'll come back to your same body when you re-embody. Well, rather a new instance of the same body, to be more specific.
Okay. The next one is by Ombwa. How can death mechanics be built in a way to discourage PvP griefing?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I'd want to know what PvP griefing is.
Let me tell you a story. Yeah, so for example, there's a game called Neocron, which I'm sure some of you have probably heard of. It's really old at this point, but it was a really early first-person shooter MMO, right? When you died in that game, you would drop a few items in a backpack, and then you would be given a list of places where you could respawn, right? And other than your apartment, which was way the F back on the other side of the world 9 times out of 10, all of the other places were open PvP areas. So what people would do when there were big fights in the wasteland going on is they would camp those spawn points, wait for people to spawn, and you're totally debuffed after you die. So they just tear you apart over and over again, or you would have it happen once and go, screw it, go back to town, and now you're literally 45 minutes of travel time away from the fight you were just in, right? And it's not, admittedly, there's a little bit of revival in that when you go to the plane of death, you're probably, pretty far away from the fight that you were just in, but the difference is you're not just slogging through your city streets to get there. You know what I mean? You're doing something different. And actually, that's kind of our answer to how you discourage PvP griefing. The person that you're trying to grief is probably not coming back for a few minutes if you've killed them. And if they killed you, you're not getting back to your troll fund for another 15, 20 minutes, very likely, right? And so, in general, rather than trying to discourage the behavior, which is really hard to do, we just try to break the cycle. And hopefully that'll work.
Also, too, it seems like a good way of, somebody who gets killed, they can just avoid, if they are getting camped in some sense, they can just, if there's a whole other element of gameplay, too, being in the Death Realm, they can just pursue those avenues for a while. And like Project Gorgon, you die there, if you were to somehow get that, in PvP grief there, you could just hang out in the Death Realm for a while and do other things, so.
Exactly.
But if death, the idea comes back to that's just a poor way of handling a failure mechanic, right? Your character is not dying. So what we're talking about is that you didn't accomplish something, so you failed. But then we created this negative feedback loop that other players can exploit to make longer. That the problem is really to the core of what does it mean to succeed and to fail, and when you fail, how does that change your direction? If your direction is still the same, it can always be manipulated in a PvP environment. If people know that when you die, you're going to go right back somewhere else, they can be there waiting for you, and then you'll die again. It could be, the Battle of Thermopylae. There could be 300
Totally.
Spartans fighting the same undying Persians, coming back over and over and over again and killing them until one deformed man kills them all.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that we're doing in Revival to sort of confound that is that, barring a couple of very specific, in safe zone exceptions, the exits to the realm of the dead wander in the other planes. So there isn't a fixed place where you're going to come out. So you might find what we call, they're called mortality gates. You might find a mortality gate and know that it'll be there for a certain amount of time, at which point you could, try to grief that exit. And you would probably be relatively successful unless a bunch of badasses came out. But that's not going to last forever. It's going to last a few minutes, and then it's going to move on to somewhere else. The permanent mortality gates are much better protected, and they're safer, and they're generally, not guaranteed to be troll-free, but generally troll-free.
Now, just to kind of break up... Sorry. I was going to go to the next question.
I was just going to say, what about a system where the griefer starts to lose, spirit or somehow starts suffering from needlessly killing people?
Well, we actually do have another system in our game called the Karma system that tracks everything that you do, and all of the gods in the world sort of judge your actions and adjust their relationships to you. So there's a god of murder who would really love that you're out there knifing people to death every day. But there's also a god of health and medicine who is not going to stand for that crap and is going to ultimately probably curse you if you keep doing it, or otherwise show their displeasure. Maybe spawn a bunch of monsters. Honestly, on gold servers, that's not even up to the systems. It's actually up to the storytelling team. So depending on how bad you are, that could be really epic. But still, the idea is exactly that, is we both want to discourage the negative behavior in-game, but we also want to make sure that you separate the two fighters in a bar brawl so that it doesn't become a riot. You know what I mean?
And does, speaking of karma, does it track who instigated the fight between two players?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, the next question, and to kind of change up the question askers, we have Teradin, who's asking specifically for Snipe. Are There are ways to exploit the death system for continual life in the spirit realms, again for revival.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually was sort of sad that we didn't get to talk about it earlier. The other cool thing about adding that sort of aging version of permadeath is the quest for immortality and the multiple flavors that might take, right? So, for example, I really hope that a bunch of people who have hit the permadeath line figure out a way to stay ghosts in the real world permanently so that they can become pirates on a ghost ship, because I think that's cool as hell. You know what I mean, right? But that's just one of the ways that you could perhaps cheat death. There are gods, for example.
Diggs will bring them to the light. Diggs is already plotting against these evil pirates.
No, it's just alt number 11.
Oh. We have another question that's really related to that, I think. Will non-player characters, NPCs, also go to the death realm when they are killed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We haven't decided yet how in-depth we're going to sim it, so we're not certain if you're going to be able to knife somebody, planeswalk to the realm of the dead, and watch their ghostly ass walk to the mortality gate, come back out, and walk into the world. But one way or another, we are going to simulate the effect of them doing so.
Interesting.
Do we have more general topic questions? Not to push revival away.
Yes,
I'm
yes,
really interested
we
in
do.
these detailed questions, but I'm also interested in the general ones.
A lot of them are actually very specific to. Most of them left are really specific to revival. I see Legendary Neurotoxin says, if you return to a place where you die and encounter the thing that killed you, is there any chance they'll have another interaction, which is, again, revival specific? I think they're all revival specific left at this point.
So let's have, if Snipe wants to answer a revival specific question, then let's reword it to a general question and talk about it.
I like that.
Okay, so I'll do that here then. We'll go to, we'll use that one that I just read then by Neurotoxin. So, death encounters, when you die somewhere because of a certain mob or an NPC, and you're trying to do a certain thing with an NPC, is there a chance that when you come back, what you were trying to do changes? Like the NPC is going to react differently because you died?
I would love that
or
idea.
mob.
I would love that idea. I would love an AI system where if you failed against some mob target, they actually learned a little bit more about you, and it's actually a more difficult encounter the second time.
Or you had to readjust how you wanted to go about interacting with them because you tried to pull a con on them and they were on to you. Now maybe you got to fight them, or now maybe you got to go through their friend.
Yeah, I think that's really cool too. I remember when we were working on Rift, we had this idea. Sadly, we called it the Nemesis system, which brings a totally different game into mind these days. But the idea was that if certain bosses could just kill you over and over and over again, they would eventually get marked as like a rival or like a nemesis, right? And so the next time you encountered them, they would talk crap. You would get a confidence, a hit to your confidence. They might become overly arrogant. Ultimately, the AI system didn't support what we wanted to do with it, so we ultimately didn't implement it. But the whole point was to create that sort of like Indiana Jones Bellic relationship, right? Where there was, every time that you were going to have defeat, slammed into your face, it was going to be this guy that was doing it to you. And I really like the idea. Like, I think it'd be really cool to do that. We don't have anything planned for like that in Revival, but I still think that's cool as hell.
Felix Greenscale said you're a bitch.
Yeah, I think that AI systems, I've said it a lot, AI systems are definitely like the most behind when it comes to MMO development as far as innovating and advancing through the years. And there should be absolutely no reason why death, why AI can't play a part in a death mechanic and all other systems in the game, why it can't start doing things. And it's really just a matter of people, I think, developers, coders, or whoever, experimenting with, innovating on what's already been done. But The next question I have, I'm also going to adjust to make it general for you guys. Amba was asking about the death penalty and for developers calculating kind of expected gameplay hours for, if you're going to have a death system, say in Revival, where you're, dead for a while, you're calculating that in, and does it adjust the way that you design your content? And really that can be, applied to any game.
If death is part of the journey, if failure and trying again and however this is incorporated is part of the journey of the character, I think it becomes more of a /camp mechanic. Like, can you stop right where you are and continue where you are? Right? How does the world work? Is your /camp really you get on some fake wagon that takes you back to your home and that you always start your journey from your home? And I think that has a lot to do with it, but I think games try to design in a way that when you log in, you feel like you're picking up where you left off. And you feel like while you're playing, even if it's 15 or 30 minutes, that you've made some progress towards that. So if you can make it part of the journey and that's part of your story, I don't see how the expected gameplay matters. But if it's designed to punish you for not accomplishing the one thing in front of you, people just are going to stop logging in. It can't be
I agree.
It can't be a roadblock. But if the thing that you wanted to do potentially won't even exist the next time that you log in because so much is changing around you and you're becoming part of a new dynamic environment, I know that I'm talking about things moving much more quickly than maybe will happen in Revival, but that's what the question is about. It's what are you doing? It's not about how much time you're playing. If the death mechanic is only about telling you that you can't do that only thing that's in front of you to do next again, why am I not queuing for a MOBA?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I kind of feel like if your downtime, if any planned downtime in your MMO isn't somehow constructive for your character or fun for your player, you screwed up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I remember original EverQuest days. There was a ton of downtime in that, and I don't really feel like there was a whole lot of designed systems in there to support and give people things to do during that downtime.
Languages. Well, that's
Yeah.
what people
Well, yeah.
spam. We spoke in languages that other people didn't know when we were sitting and waiting for nothing to do.
And that's the thing. Like back in those early days, people coming straight out of MUDs and tabletop RPGs, people were really creative, and that's no offense to anybody younger generation coming up, but people back then were prepared to come up with things to do, so when they had this massive amount of downtime that they had to wait for, they found ways to do things, and I think that this new generation can do that kind of thing as well, but it's not something that I think they're necessarily prepared for or equipped, having already come out of games that this is just the norm.
How many of you ever played EverQuest actually, you mentioned player created things for downtime, ever actually participated in some of the gambling? I don't know how many of you remember, like the Bazaar, you'd see these chat boxes pop up, oh, come gamble, you roll with this, that, and the other, and you can get, so much more of your money, and
I was a Stein of Magog farmer. I didn't actually do anything but take advantage of mechanics for monetary gain.
Nice.
I use downtime to read.
Yeah,
me too, actually.
There's definitely, hitting back on the very question itself, if you are going to have a lot of people dead in your game for an extended period of time, there has to be a reason for that, and they should have something to do. I don't think every game, for the reason I pointed out, is that, I don't think every audience is really prepared to create reasons to tolerate. They'll just go play another game. And Sog, earlier you mentioned, when you log, a lot of games are designed that when you log out and log back in, it's meant to emulate exactly where you left off. For some reason, I know this is slightly off topic, but I was thinking of a game I was watching some YouTubes on recently called Reign of Kings, and when people log off, they actually leave a sleeping body wherever they were, and it's like free game in this place.
In
and
a
people,
banana hammock,
yeah,
laying on the ground.
people can handcuff you, take you into a jail, and just put you in jail. And when you log in, you're in somebody's jail. So
That game's just all about role playing. It was made for groups of Twitch streamers to enact stories for people to see, people to I don't know. Hey, it is a neat mechanic, but that specific game, I swear, was just made for YouTube and Twitch.
definitely.
Well, I wanted to chime in to say that that question has me thinking about what is so. Typically, the way that would work, that you would jump back into the game, is you would have your quest log, and whatever you didn't finish the last game, you're going to try and finish at least a couple of those things. So as Sog said, what are your goals? How do you know what your goals are going to be for your game session? And that's easy to determine when a game is static.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really easy to determine when a game is dynamic. And if I'm gone for 2 days, are those NPCs I was supposed to save? Do they still need saving? Somebody else may have helped them along. So I think it's going to be difficult in some ways to anticipate how long our game session should be to accomplish a particular task, because we won't necessarily know what those tasks are. But hopefully there will be enough tasks that we can accomplish either in the live world or the spirit world or somewhere. We just have to be able to have some tasks that are that we can accomplish within an hour or a couple of hours of gameplay.
Did you read that Ralph Coster article about Jedi Wars Galaxies, about how, so he says that when people realized that they figured out how you could become a Jedi, that's when the game started taking a downturn, because people were logging into the game and playing the role that they wanted to play and interacting and participating in society. But then when people realized that there was a way that they could just, literally grind out and hope to hit the right random triggers, and literally go A to Z down and work on things to try to hit the right triggers to become a Jedi, that they stopped doing that. And he's been doing a lot of writing recently about how to create that I'm a participant in the world, and when you log in, and I've talked about this in quite a few of our shows, when you log into an RPG game, you want to be logging into your character. I want to be logging into my character. I want to be logging in as the guy that acts this way and does these things and fits in this role in the world. Not, well, I'm on my path to level 100 and, or in IKEA, I need to go kill things that can't respond to me and just and hopefully I get to level 99 and I become a dragon, and then for some reason I feel like I'm special. I want to know what I'm doing because I'm a part of the world. I'm a participant in it, and that has to be the core of the design for any of the things that we talk about for future ideas to matter.
That actually ties into the very last question that we have time for. Baby Cannon says, do you think it's possible for a game to be successful or profitable that requires a new generation of gamers to be retrained to do things that old schoolers are used to? Do you think or how do you think it can be done? So it's kind of twofold. Is it possible, and if it is, how?
It's hard. I always use IKEA as my example because I played through the early 2000s mostly, and as I've gone back, and we used to do things where we literally used the emote system to pretend that we were doing things and add our own content into the game, and now I go back and they're like, well, isn't there a GM event? Like, isn't there, like, one of the gods of the world going to make this like, okay, come on, get this through your head, that everything that happens in this world is text put on someone's screen. That if we type it, and everyone types it, and everyone acts like it's real, it's just as real as any official mechanic that's built in, and I've failed to... I know that's an extreme in a MUD
I hate
world.
the texting role-playing thing. I want the game to feel like I'm in a movie. If I can't see it actually in the game, then it's not happening. And I don't want somebody texting that an apple fell on the ground in front of me and an apple isn't really there. But that's me.
I mean, you guys are getting into the real core of the question that I think, it's the problem in question here where technology is evolving to the point where, it's not necessarily a game that is a text, it's not a story anymore, in the sense that you read a book, it's a story, you use your imagination to bring it to life. Games aren't that way anymore. You're still trying to convey a story, a narrative, you're still trying to create something fun to engage in, but the fact that it has left the world of text, which, can be fairly infinite in possibilities, there's a lot more restrictions that you have to operate under. So when you're trying to create a game that, is entertaining, successful, and people want to come back and re-engaging with, you're more limited in how you can do that. And if you're going to do it in ways that appeal to people who are, you're never really going to be able to do it in ways to appeal to people who have always been a fan of this text thing. 100%, there's always going to be a shortcoming. It's always going to fall short. So I think, for my own personal thought on the question, I don't think that it can successfully be done in the sense that you're creating the same type of game that existed before for a new generation, because I think really it's not necessarily just a different generation anymore. It's two different types of media.
Yeah, those games still exist.
Yeah,
one of the
Yeah, it's like
one of the
books
fun
and film,
things to me,
right?
I just want to say real quick, because one of the
talking
funniest
over
things
the
to me,
guest.
I'm going to let him talk, but I'm going to promote his game. One of the funniest things to me is that I'm going to throw two games under the bus, Shroud of the Avatar and what's the other one? Well, even Crowfall. They talk about these old school mechanics that they want to get back to, that old school people didn't like in the first place. So old school people don't really want to play the old school mechanics either. Revival talks about old school, but all the stuff they're doing is next generation stuff. So somehow they're thinking about old school stuff that they liked, but they're packaging it in next generation wrappers that make it feel like it's fun to play.
I think
buy
that's
that.
key, right? Go ahead, man. Sorry.
I was just saying I agree. I don't say that to Diggs often enough, so point it out.
It's permanent. It's recorded. Go ahead, Snipe.
I agree too. I actually, when we set out to do Revival, Online and Swig, even though those games are huge influences to what we're doing, for us it was more like there are all these awesome design tools that we kind of left on the table when we walked away from these games, and these tools make these awesome experiences that we don't have anymore possible, right? So, yeah, I'm going to grab that tool, and I'm going to try to recreate that experience, but I also have all of these other tools on the table that got created after that, and that'd be stupid to leave them there, right? And so, to me, the key to making old school mechanics work is not recreating them, but reinventing them, if that makes any cliched, buzzwordy sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that's where so many developers kind of stumble up when they're, and Diggs, the other game you were thinking of was Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, I think, is the one you would probably be thinking of.
Go out of your way to throw another game under the bus. Why don't?
Hey, I'm helping Diggs achieve his goal. Anyways, but no, I think, these developers are, and no fault to them. There were we enjoyed playing these games for lots of reasons. I'm not necessarily certain they're keying in on all the right things, but I think that it all boils down to me, and this is the reason I'm talking and expanding upon this is because everybody on this show knows that I'm a huge fan of RPGs, role-playing games, and this contextual, where you're participating in a world as the character, and you're not in this typical MMO of today where you just go in, you log into an avatar, and you don't even have to act as that avatar would act. You don't have to act like a paladin if you're a paladin. There's no in-game mechanics that require you to participate in the world as if you were that class, other than combat. Combat has you do that, but in any other way, there's not. Whereas in old games like EverQuest and Ultima Online, depending on what you did, what you chose to be, you actually had more reasons to be that type of character or class or what have you in game, because there was a lot of mechanics that required, if you were a dark elf, hey, you're kill on sight to all this, these X places. If you were a druid, you're acting out as a druid because you can do really cool things like teleport people. There were things that were awesome, and I don't think the thing that is fun is going back to these mechanics necessarily, but it's really just about recapturing the spirit of people actually participating in the world, and the world around you feels more alive because of the players that are actually adding context to the game, or at least playing somewhat within the context of it, that it brings more life to the game. Whereas, you log into World of Warcraft or X other, WoW clone that's out there today, and it doesn't matter what players are around you, they're not adding any context to the game or immersion because they're doing whatever the hell they want to. And,
They
story...
might as well not be there.
Yeah, long story short, I'm just getting back to, the thing that's going to make these games fun of recapturing old things is if you recapture the old spirit of it and the old, context and what was enjoyable. It's not about the mechanics, and it's not about, capturing an older style of play that has been lost. It's not lost. Like Phantom X said earlier, those games are still there. If you want to play them, you can go back and play them. Even Project 1999, that's not the vanilla. I mean, that's like vanilla EverQuest. It doesn't have all the new stuff added to it. So, but
Yeah, that's sort of that's my answer too. I mean, those games are still there. I mean, if you want to play them, they are there. The thing that drives me the nuts the most, and I think I saw something on Twitter, somebody did this again, was like, why not just recreate EverQuest with better graphics? Well, EverQuest is there. Better graphics isn't going to change that game if you want to play it.
Let's improve the polygon count, and that makes a game better.
Yeah, I mean...
That'll fix it.
But the other side to that is there are a lot of other smaller developers that are sort of the spiritual successors to these old-style games. So, I mean, we'll see. Who knows? If they reinvent things, it might work. It might not. But I can think of probably 6 or more that are out there trying to rework that wheel.
To cap off that, the original question by Baby Cannon, I think, and adding to what Phantom X just kind of said in his last comments, I think that people doing this with these old games and trying to re-embody in a new way, they will be successful and they will be profitable to an extent. They might just barely get back their return. It may live popularly for 3 months or 6 months, but to have the type of legacy that the previous games had, I'm not sure that's possible for those types of games. It is possible, I guess, but I'm not sure that that's likely, considering the game hopping, MMO hopping environment that exists now, because people aren't tied to the worlds anymore. They're just not, and so people hop games, and there's no amount of legacy any game is going to build or any memorable experiences when you're not attached to the game. Which is to me why I always harp on the immersion of a game, because you're never going to have an EverQuest or a Ultima Online if you're not focusing on immersion. Which is why I got so on board with EverQuest Next, still hoping it does good. Why I'm really getting on board with Revival, because these games, the developers are focused on the immersion. That's not the only thing they're doing, and the mechanics aside, they're not necessarily trying to recapture mechanics, they're trying to focus on immersion, which I think brings it all back around to creating a game that can last, be memorable, and people can look back and say, oh, did you play that game? Remember when we played that game? You don't do that to any games that are out there now. We talk about EverQuest, Ultima Online, vanilla WoW a little bit, and some other games out there. Star Wars Galaxies, while it lived, even in its very incomplete state, Vanguard, different things like that. These games were paying attention to immersion, whereas now they're not.
All those games are a decade old too. Like I think part of the reason we're seeing so many small teams try to do something different is because everybody's noticed how burnt out we all are on the DQ mud WoW EQ model. You know what I mean?
The one thing that we want to make sure that we're not saying, or I'm not saying, is it's not a new generation of player that's at fault. It's never this idea that new players aren't right for the game. No, the burden is on the development of the game. It's like, my game would have succeeded if we had better people playing it. That just yeah. People like Stein don't have jobs if they say things like that, if they believe things like that, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
That's just not how it is. This is 2015. If we want to make a game, if anybody wants to make a game, you make a game now. Or invent a time machine. If you really want to make EverQuest better than EverQuest was, well, you should first start building a time machine.
Yeah. Go back to 1996 and start that.
Yeah, or even earlier. I don't. But we can't ever get into this trap. No matter how old we get, no matter how much we remember about, playing AOL games in the 90s and having fun with those, we can't ever fall into this trap of believing that the player base is somehow worse. Because the player base is right now bigger than it's ever been.
Yep.
And, we know that the MMO market share as a percentage of the player base of games is dropping. And that's an opportunity for the right development team to come together and put something there that changes that trend. At least I think so. I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
So we've pushed past our time a little bit, but I do want to give everybody a chance to kind of, any last thoughts on death that maybe you didn't get to express during the show, or anything that you want to talk about.
I did not during the show, but I have in chat a little bit. I would love to see necromancy tied into death. I'll just leave it there. That's a whole nother discussion. But.
Nice. About you, Diggs?
No, I'm good. I could sit here discussing this stuff for another hour or so, but I'm just overwhelmed with the great discussion we just had.
Yes, and then bringing it back to Snipe Hunter as our guest, that's provided a lot of sparks for a lot of these different topics. Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about? Maybe plug Revival, give people places where they can find information about that?
Oh man, gotta be careful. If you open that door, I'll never stop.
Okay, keep us running all night. Just go for it.
You act like we care. We're gonna.
Well, the thing is that Ombo's blog is waiting on me to edit it, so some people probably do care.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say is that things like death are way more important to these games than we tend to realize they are, and part of the reason that we discount them is because of how poorly they've been treated in the past. My hope is that Revival and other games like it will change that trend, but at the end of the day, I don't know that it's really going to change. We can build the best systems in the world, and if it turns out they're just not fun for players, we're not going to change that loop either, and that kind of scares me a little bit, but God damn it, we're going to try.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love these guys, absolutely.
Yeah, we're excited to have you too. I mean, we get guests on every once in a while, and it's not always that we get guests that we just really gel with and share a mind, but really, really great time. We appreciate the time you took to sit down and have some fun with us here. But yeah, if you guys want to find out about Revival game, there is we'll drop a link in the chat if we haven't already. I will, and we also have an actual show about specifically Revival on Sundays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. So, and we push all that stuff up to YouTube like we do with our TheoryForge Friday content. So you can check out our YouTube channel, TheoryForge, and get everything there. Go back, watch crazy past episodes back in our younger, less bearded days or something like that. But yeah, thank you guys for coming. Thanks to the guests, everybody, the hosts. Thanks to the guys down in chat holding it up. I know Neurotoxin was down there hanging out with everybody too. So, and thank you all guests for coming, submitting your questions. We didn't even get to go through all of them because there were so many. So, but we'll keep those on there, and if we get a chance to plug them into other future episodes, we will do so. So, thank you guys again. We'll see you all later.